Gary Kimmett spent the next 40 years with Gleason. From 1967 to 1996, he was in the engineering division, where he attained the position of Vice President of Engineering. From 1998 to his retirement in 2008, Gary was in sales and marketing. As Vice President of Worldwide Sales and Marketing, he traveled extensively for Gleason, visiting more than 30 countries. Gary still travels extensively, by the way. Currently, Gary is a member of the Board of Directors of the Gleason Family Foundation. For those of you who don't know why this is the Kate Gleason Auditorium, that organization was instrumental in funding this auditorium, and I want to also acknowledge their ongoing support for the Rochester Public Library. Please help me welcome Gary Kimmett.
Thank you, Linda. Given the weather, we should probably be meeting out there, but we'll give it a try in here. I've got quite a few slides, and I'm going to buzz through them as quickly as I can to stay on schedule. There are a lot of words on some of the slides, and you don't have to read all of them. The important parts I'll point out. So let's get started. This book, Steve Jobs, by Walter Isaacson, was very significant to me and probably to a lot of us here because we lived through a lot of the events and circumstances that surround the story that's told in that book. Just a few words about Walter Isaacson. He has written a number of books. He's the author of these 3 books listed below: Einstein, Ben Franklin, and Kissinger. He's been the managing editor of Time magazine, and he was the chairman of CNN. And I don't know a lot about Aspen Institute, but that's where he is now. A little background on the book. This is a heavy-duty, thick book, 627 pages if you count the index and all the reference material at the back. Jobs sought out Isaacson to write this book, and it took a couple of years for Isaacson to decide that he would do it. And Jobs agreed that he would have no influence over how it was done, what material Isaacson collected, or how he collected it. He had interviews with over 100 friends and acquaintances of Jobs. He had over 40, or at least 40, interviews with Jobs himself. So this is a very well-researched book at the personal level. And it was published on October 24th, 2011, which isn't that long ago. The book covers Jobs' entire life from birth to death, and I'll get into a few details about that. It covers both his personal life and his business life, so you get to know him in this book as a person. And it's written from birth to death, so it's written in a timeline fashion. And this is about truly a one-of-a-kind person, warts and all, with emphasis on the warts, as you'll see. If you've read the book, you know there are a lot of warts in his personality, and we'll talk about those. The book actually delves deeply into Jobs' emotional side. And he had some interesting emotional aspects to his personality, unusual ones. And it also details a lot of the important moments in his business life, which is probably about 80% of the book. But it's a personal story, personal insights into him as a person in his business. Jobs is quoted in the book as saying this quote below, which I'll read, why he wanted this book written. And in quotes, he says, "I wanted my kids to know me. I wasn't always there for them. And I wanted them to know why and to understand what I did." So a huge part of his life was dedicated to his work. He was away from his family. He wasn't particularly close to his family. And he wanted something to stay behind to show not only the world, but his kids, his family. The parts of the book that talk about Apple, the business, go into great depth about the innovations, how they occurred, the products that were developed by Apple, and how Jobs and his creative team came to decide things and do things. It describes how new products were introduced. Probably all of us have seen either on TV or somewhere the theatrical introductions that Jobs put together and executed to introduce each product. He was a showman. And the book details all, and it's a long list, of the accomplishments that Jobs made in his career. A little detail about Jobs. He was born in 1955. He was born out of wedlock to Joanne Schiebel and John Gendali, who was Syrian. Because of the social pressures of the time, they decided that Steve would be given up for adoption, and so he was given up for adoption at birth to Paul and Clara Jobs, and of course that's where he got his name, his family name, Jobs. An interesting part of that was the birth mother, Joanne Schiebel, made one condition for this adoption, and that was, since she was relatively uneducated, she wanted a guarantee that her son would be put through college by the people who adopted Steve Jobs. His new family, the Jobs family, moved to Mountain View, California when Steve was 5 years old, and of course that's Silicon Valley, or part of Silicon Valley. Early in his life, and I think if I recall correctly, it was while he was in high school, he worked at Hewlett-Packard, another famous Silicon Valley company, still in business today, still quite successful today. And there he met Steve Wozniak, his eventual partner. Later, he worked at Atari. Some of you may remember the Atari games. And this is what he looked like right about at that time. He was handsome, but he was a rebel. I shouldn't say but, and he was a rebel. A few things about his early life. He wasn't happy in the high school that he was attending. And like most places, he attended the high school, the public high school, in the area where he lived. He convinced his parents that they had to move because he had to go to a high school he liked better. And they did. When he was ready to go to college, he picked one college, Reed College in Oregon, and it was the most expensive college on their list of possibilities. And the Jobs family was not well off. They really couldn't afford to send him to that college, but they remembered their promise. They sacrificed, they mortgaged, and they sent him to Reed College. And when he got there, he discovered that you actually had to attend class, that there were requirements for getting a degree. He didn't like that, and he chose not to attend the required classes. He picked out the classes that he liked, and I mentioned calligraphy, and went to those. They weren't even on his list, and after a year and a half, he dropped out. There's a lot of intervening stuff going on in his life at the time, a lot of social stuff, a lot of, let's call them hippie activities at the time, and I'll get into those in a minute. Also, I think it was slightly before that time, he had a daughter with his high school sweetheart, obviously out of wedlock. And one of the things that sort of laid the groundwork for how he acted later on was he ignored the daughter. He disavowed any knowledge that she existed. He did not pay any kind of child care. He said no to all of it, and it took a couple of years for the courts to finally get around to forcing him to pay attention to his daughter. And that's his daughter when he finally did come around and meet her. I think she was 12 or so before that happened. Later in life, they did become close, but it took a while. I made a list of some of his early personal traits, starting with his bizarre eating habits. He had all kinds of diets. A couple of them were carrots only and fruit only. He bathed once a week during this early period in his life, And he was sure he didn't have any body odor, but his bosses at Atari knew that he did from personal experience. And to protect other employees from him, they moved him to the night shift. A lot of the time he didn't wear any shoes. And he became interested in Zen Buddhism, eventually to the point of going to India for 6 or 7 months, searching for spiritual enlightenment. And also during the same period, and this is why I called him a hippie earlier, he took mind-altering drugs. Later in his career, he talked about, when he was a famous executive, he used to ask people he was interested in hiring whether or not they smoked pot or took drugs, and if they didn't, he didn't think they were very good. They hadn't expanded their minds. He eventually met his birth mother. She told him about a sister. So his birth mother and his father, birth father, had a daughter after they were married, and he hadn't known about it until he and she were an adult. He never wanted to meet his birth father, although he knew where he was. He, in fact, inadvertently met him a couple of times because his father, birth father, was running a restaurant in the area where he lived, and he attended that restaurant and later recalled having met the guy. And vice versa. The father understood that he had met him only after the fact. Another little tidbit about his life, Joan Baez. He had an affair with her that lasted a couple of years, and she was a lot older than he was. He revered Bob Dylan, collected all of his songs, played them all the time, right through the end of his life. Another interesting connection there is Bob Dylan also had an affair with Joan Baez. So I don't know how they worked all that out. This house is still there. This is I think it's in Cupertino, California. This is where Jobs grew up. That's the garage where the company Apple was founded. A list of a few characteristics of Jobs as an adult, and I pulled all these words out of the book and out of other people's views of him that I saw online. In no particular order, he was a judgmental person. He was emotional in the sense that if he didn't get his way, he cried as an adult, right through when he was CEO of Apple. Starting with maybe the most public time was when he was 27 years old. He thought he should be named Time's Man of the Year. He wasn't, and he cried. He was inconsistent. You'd come to him with an idea, he hated it. You saw him the next day, he loved it. But when he loved it, a lot of times it became his idea, and he disavowed the fact that he ever heard it from you. So I call that being dishonest. A few other characteristics: he was known as being self-absorbed, dysfunctional at times, absolutely a perfectionist, and this carries over into a lot of the Apple products, again, which I'll talk about in a minute. Controlling in a number of ways. He liked to control every aspect of how products were created, what was in the products. And compulsive, a lot of instant decisions, sometimes reversed. Stubborn, mean, manipulative, intense, fanatical, ruthless, and cruel. So when I said warts and all, there's a lot of warts. All out of the book, and of course he allowed all that to be written about him. Now, Apple Computer, which of course is where he became famous, began with his newfound friend Steve Wozniak, who conceived of the Apple I product. And in 1975, Steve, who was the technical whiz of the group, was able to figure out how to type a character on a keyboard and how that character would wind up as the character you typed, an L, a Q, whatever, on the screen. That had never been done before. He had to write software to make that happen. And in 1976, they took that knowledge together with a bunch of stuff. Here's another little story that's about Steve Jobs. He called up the chairman, CEO of Hewlett-Packard and said, I need some parts. Here's a list of electronic parts I need. I can't pay for them, but I've got a project. I need them. He got them. He was convincing. He was a salesman. So with all that stuff, they put together the early Apple I product. One other significant piece that has a connection here is, I've labeled it as the Xerox connection. He went to the Palo Alto Research Center of Xerox in 1979 and saw there the use of what we all know today as the mouse. It had never been used before. The manipulation of pixels, making things on the screen one pixel at a time. And Jobs recognized this as the key to where he wanted to go, the simple, intuitive computer, which would allow people like us to use a computer and do productive work with it. Xerox signed away the rights, no problem. They didn't see any value in it at all. Sounds a little familiar. And by the time Jobs was 25 years old, and that's pretty young compared to me, he was worth $100 million. This is what that first product looked like. I don't know how they came up with that number, but I'm sure that Steve Jobs did it. $666.66, and I don't know if it had anything to do with the devil. And they didn't make very many, but it was the first. Steve Wozniak on the right, Steve Jobs on the left in 1976. I mentioned this already. Steve Wozniak provided the engineering, software, and technical expertise for the duo and for the company, and Steve Jobs led the business. He was the executive. He made the executive decisions. Wozniak, by the way, was happy to give things away. He didn't care anything about pricing or marketing or any of that. Jobs did. He was good at the promotion, and he was an executive in the true sense of the word, even though this was a very small company at the beginning. A few different words about Steve Jobs as he progressed in his career, his leadership characteristics. He had, throughout his career, laser-like focus, and I pulled, again, a lot of these words out of the book. Tremendous self-discipline. He worked long, long hours. A lot of self-confidence and self-belief. Tremendous attention to detail, which stemmed from his father. When he was growing up in that house that I showed you, his father did things like have him paint the fence. And he said, you got to make the back side of the fence look as good as the front side of the fence. Even though nobody's going to see the back side, everything needs to be perfect. That kind of mentality was instilled in him from his father, his adopted father. And that characteristic was carried out through his life at Apple. For example, he would spend a lot of time worrying about what the screws look like inside the case of a computer where no one would ever be able to see it, or what the straightness of the wiring would be on the internal circuit boards inside a computer. No one would see it. He would say, we're not going to introduce this product. It made all these lines crooked. We're going to start over. And he did those things. He was seeking perfection. A few more positive thoughts, positive characteristics about Jobs. He was charismatic. He could lead people to places where they didn't know they could go. Inspiring, demanding, innovative, creative, and intuitive. And the intuitive part's kind of interesting. Leading people to places where they couldn't go. His teams at Apple created a term, which I think they borrowed from Star Wars or some other place, a reality distortion field. He was able to challenge people to do things that they thought were impossible and get them to do it. Something that couldn't be real until he made them do it and they accomplished it. So they called that his reality distortion field. And Jobs always sweat the small stuff. He paid attention to small stuff in all aspects of his life, including the things I've listed here. He worried when he went into restaurants with a group where everybody sat, what the menus looked like, what was on the menus, what the prices were, where the food came from, etc. But in addition, at work, He worried about what the ads look like, and a lot of you will remember his introductions of new products and what those ads look like. And he worried about how many keystrokes it took to accomplish anything on one of his devices. He didn't like on-off buttons. So a lot of the devices that Apple makes don't have on-off buttons. He was looking for, and usually achieved in the products, simple, intuitive elegance. He needed to know, and he would strive to know, how everything worked, because he wanted all the details to be perfect. And when you want things to be simple, he would say, you got to control everything. And he saw both the big picture, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar company, and the detail, the full range from top to bottom. He coined this phrase, the intersection of technology and liberal arts. He was a liberal arts guy. He didn't have a technical degree, although he understood technology and some parts of technology. He was instrumental in innovating. But he saw Apple as creating products at this intersection. That one should be able to take what you know from the arts and the technology and bring them together to create products that are intuitive, simple, and sophisticated. There's Steve, very late in his life, on the right, introducing the iPhone, and on the left, the iPad 2. Recently, the next iPad, which is called the iPad, was introduced. And by the way, they sold 3 million. I just saw it in the paper today. They sold 3 million since Friday. Not bad. iPhone 4S, I got one. I talked to Siri, and she tells me a lot of good stuff. Some of you know what that means. All their stuff, all their products are clean, elegant, simple, functional, and intuitive. We all know who Bill Gates is. And these guys grew up in the same place, in the same arena, at about the same time. But they were quite opposite. Microsoft, which is Bill Gates, had the philosophy that his product, the software, could be used by anybody, anywhere. He would license it to be used anywhere. So all the laptops that people have that are called PCs are capable of using his Microsoft software. Steve Jobs had the opposite point of view. Nobody was going to tinker with anything that he created. So he controlled both the hardware and the software and everything inside so that nobody could get in there. I think a few people have tried and maybe been successful, but nobody could get in there and mess with his stuff. So controlling versus open. Those are probably the two characteristics that represent those two guys. Gates had a privileged upbringing. I think his father was an attorney. They were about the same age, as I mentioned. Gates was deeply technical. He had deep technical knowledge, whereas Jobs did not, and they didn't like each other. Both were, Gates still is, giants in the industry, and they worked together from time to time. I don't know if you can see this. Here's an early picture of them meeting. If you can see that, that's Steve Jobs without shoes. He's still doing it. Here are some things that they felt about each other. Gates said about Steve Jobs, Steve doesn't know anything about technology. He's just a super salesman. 99% of what he says and thinks is wrong. Not a very positive point of view on that. Jobs was convinced that Microsoft was stealing his ideas. But he needed their help from time to time, and he agreed, and he had lawsuits. He agreed to drop the various lawsuits if they would work together, which they did. So here they are again, competing, clashing, working, talking. So this is 1985, which is about 10 years after Apple was created. Jobs got into significant conflicts with his board of directors, and he was thrown out. When he was thrown out, he cashed out his stocks, got his $100 million in cash, and decided to do something with it, and he founded a new company called Next. The logo for Next is, as it's seen there, with the lowercase e. Some creative genius helped him figure that out. And their idea was to create a research computer that should be reasonably priced and very powerful. He also took some money and went to filmmaker George Lucas. You might remember who he is. And he bought a computer animation studio called Pixar. And not too much later, Toy Story was created by that company, which was the top-grossing film in 1995. And it continues today to be a top-grossing animated film producer. And in 2006, that company was sold to Disney for a lot of money, and that's how Jobs got a position on their board of directors. The company next was acquired by Apple in 1996 for $429 million. Apple didn't really like their product, meaning their hardware, but liked their software, needed it for their next generation of products. With it came Jobs. So 11 years after he's thrown out, he's back. And he started out slowly, but took off quickly in a reasonable amount of time. And in the year prior, which was 1996, the company Apple lost $1 billion. The first quarter after Jobs was back, they were profitable. So he did a very quick turnaround, and I won't go into the detail, we're running short of time here, as to how he did that, but it was all those characteristics that you saw in some earlier slides. He was an emotional guy, and he held grudges. Some people will know that Adobe Flash doesn't work on Apple products. It doesn't work because Jobs didn't want it on there, and he wouldn't let it on there because he clashed with them. He wasn't interested in licensing anything that he did, that Apple did. He wanted to kill his competitors. Android, which is a very successful smartphone, he believed was a total ripoff of his work, and he was quoted just last year of saying, "I will spend my last dying breath if I need to, and I'll spend every penny of Apple's $40 billion in the bank to right this wrong." He was considered a marketing genius, but his marketing style was different from a lot of people's. Here's some quotes from him out of the book. "People don't know what they want until you show it to them. That's why I never rely on market research. Our task is to read things that are not yet on the page." So he was anticipating what people would want after they saw what he did. And here's what I referred to earlier. We've always tried to be at the intersection of technology and liberal arts, to be able to get the best of both, to make extremely advanced products from a technology point of view, but also to have them be intuitive, easy to use, fun to use, so they really fit the users, and the users don't have to come to them, they come to the user. iTunes is another thing he had a hand in. He created a solution to a problem that was in existence at the time of music piracy on the internet. He created the iTunes Store, which solved those problems, and skeptics predicted nobody would pay for digital music. They sold 1 million songs in the first 6 days. This is what Jobs looked like. There's a story behind his sweatshirt, which I won't get into now. These are the industries, there are actually more, but these are the ones that I could relate to that were revolutionized by Jobs. Personal computers, animated movies, Pixar, iTunes, the telephone, I have one, and it's not ringing at the moment, and tablet computing, the iPad. Truly revolutionized these industries. This is his wife, Lauren Powell, which I think he was married to her 20 years at his death. Some of the contradictory traits I listed. He was fabulously wealthy, yet led an austere life. His house, before he got married, his house had a chair and a couch and a table, and that was it. He sat on the floor. He practiced Zen Buddhism, but wasn't calm or peaceful or mellow. He was rich, but not philanthropic. He was charismatic, but critical and demanding. He felt abandoned, and that started, of course, with his childhood at birth having been abandoned. And yet, He also felt special. He didn't have to follow the rules. He parked in handicapped parking places. He didn't even have a license plate on the cars he drove. He didn't bother. And he was an emotional guy, cried all the time, but he didn't have empathy for other people. Again, some quotes from him. Some are from his ads. "Stay hungry, stay foolish. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. By expecting them to do great things, you can get them to do great things." And he's talking about his employees. Apple recently passed Exxon as the most valuable U.S. company in terms of market capitalization, and they're still on a roll. This was when they were worth about $500 a share, and they're now worth over $600 a share. So they are the most valuable company by the value of their stock in the U.S. Not the world, because there are some Chinese companies owned by the government that might be bigger. In 2010, Apple overtook Microsoft, which is now number 3, so his chief rival is right in there too, and at his death, Jobs was worth about $8 billion. He died on October 5th, 2011. He was 56 years old of pancreatic cancer. He left his wife, 3 children, and his first children, so it's actually 4. His first child, 4 children. And that particular logo ends my presentation. That's Steve Jobs. Normally the Apple logo has just a little bite out of it. And that's the cover of the book. Thank you very much.